I think the first book, you're also building a writing life alongside writing this book. Also, you're just writing this thing. You're not sure if it's what it is yet. But that's what I was saying, was building up a writing life alongside working on this project. And for many of those years, I didn't even know that it would look like this. So I'd say formally, when I started to think about book with a capital B, I guess, would be graduate school. So around 2013 is when things started to really come together, and I started to think of like an essay collection. I had been thinking about that earlier in the earlier years, but yeah, so it's kind of two things going on at the same time. I think I almost kind of parallel it to like, I have never delivered a child, but my sisters have. And in both of their experiences, like the first baby, the labor took a long time. And the next baby for one of my sisters, it kind of like just shot out through her. So I think that there's something happening first that is sort of bigger than the project.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think you're learning how to do it, right? You're learning how to be like, not only learning how to do the writing and the bookmaking, but also just like you said, you're learning how to make a life that accommodates this practice of like what, daily writing or close to daily writing.
100%. And it doesn't even necessarily mean daily. I think that for me, the word like permission came to mind. A lot of those years were also just figuring out like a kind of a mental permission that this is your life, that this is the path that I've taken. I have come from a family where there's a lot of art and a lot of art making, but professionally, more of my family members are in medicine, are in some kind of like track career. So this felt really kind of like far off to me. So I think for me, even alongside becoming equipped with a tangible writing practice, those 10 years were also this spiritual journey of me giving myself permission to pursue this career, pursue this thing that felt very different from where I came from. I often say that even though I never took like a pre-med class or something, for some reason I had this idea, like I felt like I was like Spider-Man, that like doctoring would just like come out of my like spider webs, where, I had been writing for as long as I could remember, but it felt sort of like impossible to me. So it was getting, there's that spiritual journey too, built into those 10 years.
Well, both of your parents are doctors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Both of them are doctors. Yeah.
Was there pressure on you from family to kind of pursue that course?
I think it was more like, well, this is what we do. And so this is what we know to tell you to do. I think the pressure came more like sort of worried about, where I was in life. A lot of my teen years and into my 20s, I also was struggling with a lot of depression that kind of snowballed into bipolar disorder diagnosis. So I think it was just sort of like a worry of like, what's going to anchor you? And here's this thing that we know that anchored us. So why don't you do that instead of, instead of this thing? I don't think I even really quite named it. But like instead of this thing that feels a little bit more out of the norm or out of stability. So that kind of thing. But they also, have these moments where I think, raising children is full of contradiction and paradoxes. There's moments within that where I, did talk to my parents in the beginning of my writing career, moments where I felt like giving up or stopping. And I just even remember my father saying something to me like, don't switch horses. I forget what the phrase was, don't switch horses in midstream or something like that, which felt kind of like extraordinary from this person that I didn't quite always even have a candid conversation about my writing life with. So,
and yet I have to interrupt because if I'm recalling correctly, your father, when your parents met, was playing in a band.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your dad has, I feel like your dad has a little bit of an artist in him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I grew up with that, like very unabashed love of the arts in our household. My father's a musician, a singer, an actor. And every weekend, they'd have people over, for as long as I could remember. And my parents would have a house party and my father would perform with a band. And just like that was the event of the weekend. Just hearing that, permeating through the house.
So
And
wait,
so,
what kind of music, may I ask?
yeah, it was Indian classical music, also Bollywood songs. It would be him and a tabla player and a harmonium player. And my dad's they all had day jobs. My dad's a doctor. One was a computer programmer. I forget. One might have worked at like Merck Labs. We grew up in Edison. Merck Labs was right there. So they all kind of like had another life. But just grew up in this town in New Jersey that was like kind of a burgeoning Indian community. And these parties at my parents' house were like the event. Like Indian community would gather, my dad would sing. And so it was kind of like an unabashedly performative household, and household where like creation was like part of, being alive. My dad had a full-on sound system in this like small little, we called it the music room even. It wasn't just like a room. It was like, this is the music room where the parties would take place, where the AV equipment was, where he would make recordings. We still have those recordings. So it definitely is something that there's a lot of appreciation of art and artistic production. And it was a lot of ways that I think also that I understood kind of like art comes from a place of longing. When I think of it now, in hearing him play and in talking to him about the music that he loves, there's a certain like kind of like longing there. I think longing for, not to be like grandiose about it, but for home, for place, for identity. And I think music is a way of grounding yourself in home, place, and identity, even as you move, even as you migrate for immigrants. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to give listeners a bit of an overview, not just of the book, but of the lives depicted in the book, namely your own. This is one of these, it's a memoir and essays, I think is the fair way to characterize it.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite kind of book of this kind because it has real velocity. It moves around.
Yes.
It makes connections between disparate subject matter and draws unlikely parallels between the two and all of that stuff. So it's fun to read. And your family history, I mean, you've touched on it a little bit. You were born in Edison, New Jersey. Your parents immigrated in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And forgive me for forgetting the particular like immigration law that they were taking advantage of.
Yeah.
They were both coming over as like excellent science students, people on like a med school track or something.
Yes, it's the 1965 Immigration Act. It's called the Hart-Celler Immigration Act, and it was specifically to bring immigrants with science training to America. It's during the Cold War era, and that competitive nature of let's bring this certain expertise to the country. And that's how they came. That's the time where America opened its doors wider than it ever had to Asian American and to Asian immigrants into this country. There we can talk about it from like the standpoint of so much of immigrant history is rooted in exclusion. The 1917 Immigrant Exclusion Act, national origins quotas. So there's a lot like this. There's a lot that kept Asians out, and this was really just like the kind of the widest the door had opened in a very long time. And an unprecedented number of Asian immigrants came in, I think more than the country expected, the government expected. Yeah.
And I guess you would characterize your parents as like, they're great immigrant success stories, right? Both doctors in the United States, raised their family in
Yeah.
Edison. But there is a lot of uh, examination of what it means to immigrate and to be a minority in this country trying to assimilate. There is this, um, like, what do you call it? The quiet model minority
Yes.
characterization that you sort of grew up with in a predominantly white private school. I know that the community that you lived in, I've never been, but it's called Little India, right? So there's a
Yeah.
huge,
Edison. Yeah.
but it sounds fabulous. Like for people who are immigrating in particular from India, there's like this very vibrant community that has formed there, correct?
Yeah, it definitely, and then I got to see it change. It was already changing by the time my parents moved to Edison, but you could really see it um, start to flourish as this um, like burgeoning Indian community. You could see businesses change. I was there, like I saw the Pizza Hut becoming Indian restaurant, but preserving like the Pizza Hut. And I could see the ice cream store become a chaat house, and you can still see like the banana split on top of the awning. And I'm like, oh, that works for chaat too.
Wait,
Um,
what is? Forgive me, I should know this, but what is chot?
Chaat is like, yeah, it's like an Indian food, like an Indian snack that you can have. It's not like ice cream. It's like more savory, but it's like, yeah, it's like a more of like a savory snack that you can have. So it literally, yeah, the banana split is a fair trade, I would say, for
All
the
right.
sign. Yeah, and it was incredible to see it change in that way, and in that same way, it's it's while that was occurring, you know, I want to back up and say there's like even with um, the country opening its doors wider than it ever had to Asian immigrants with the 1965 Immigration Act, America still opened their doors to a particular type of immigrant, like those that were able to access science and medical training, right? So that kind of like is, you already have some level of mobility, upward mobility in your home country to be able to access that education. And then you have that certain type of immigrant coming in. And I would say like, want to like flag that as thinking about that's something that comprised Edison. It changed over time. There's, immigrants of all different socioeconomic levels and backgrounds in Edison, broadly from that immigration law have come into this country. But all to say that while this ethnic enclave was, coming about, I think that going to a predominantly white private school, also my parents as these, upwardly mobile doctors, there's also this sort of chasing whiteness in some way that is like paradoxically occurring while you're in these communities. And it's chasing whiteness in this way that is like cut in the cloth of the model minority myth, which emerged during 1965, during this time of immigration, right? Because it was also, the time of the civil rights movement, then blossoming into the Black Power movement. And so the idea of the model minority, the Asian American model minority, was this sort of construct to, contrast the idea of the Black American problem minority, positioning people that were Black people advocating for equal rights, calling out injustice as problem makers. And so it's, the model minority myth and the problem minority are at least both these stereotypes that were used to keep us apart and also uphold the ultimate myth of white supremacy, this lie that is a lived reality that we all live with. And so, yeah, even in these like massively Indian enclaves, there is still this chasing whiteness that's occurring, and in particular, chasing it through being a model minority, being, another way of thinking it is a part of whiteness while being apart from it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just to like put a finer point on it. When you say chasing whiteness, it's not like chasing being white. It's chasing the privilege that comes with being white, right? And accommodate and being accepted basically by this white supremacist structure that exists in this country.
Yeah, and I think both things are true. I think that you are certainly first and foremost chasing the privileges of being white. But some of that is like deeply like Toni Morrison and Blue Sky. Some of that like occurs in chasing the like how whiteness is presented. Yeah.
So you are going to, as a teenager, a mostly white private school in the Edison, New Jersey area, right? It wasn't like a boarding school or anything.
It's just a private school. Yeah.
Okay. So you're in this milieu, and as the book opens, as I recall, you're sort of, getting into your college years and starting to grapple with mental health challenges you alluded to earlier, like depression, and then ultimately a bipolar diagnosis.
Yeah.
And these events in your life, these developments in your life coincide, I think, with maybe your first really serious reckoning with all of the stuff we've just been discussing. And maybe like, and correct me if you disagree, but that's the way it seemed to me as a reader, is that you're kind of coming of age and you're starting to reckon with where you fit in to this country and to this whole like white supremacist structure that exists here.
Yeah.
And they're very funny. I mean, they're kind of funny. They're heartbreaking too, but these passages where I think you're dating a white guy and like you're sort of into the Grateful Dead and you're at Brown.
Still
I'm a deadhead. I went to Boulder. So like this resonated.
I spent a lot of time in Boulder and I'm still a deadhead. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like in terms of crowds, like there are worse crowds. Lots of white people. Like if you're going to be hanging with a big, huge crowd of white people, like deadheads are pretty nice, I think, in general.
We have a whole other podcast on the Grateful Dead. Like I can go down a whole rabbit hole about that. Yeah.
But like, it's just interesting that you were sort of on the road. I think you were in New Mexico, somewhere near Taos, and you suddenly just were like, where do I fit? Right. Yeah. You looked around and you're not like pretty much the only person of color except for like one other guy.
Yeah.
And it was just this moment. Is that accurate? Is that when it really hit?
Yeah. Yeah. Claudia Rankine, I just saw her talk a few, not just actually, it was a few years ago. And she, one thing that she said really rung true with this moment that you're bringing up. She said that writing is an act of slowing down time. And I feel like that really is a moment where like just giving myself the space to reflect and think about it, to slow that moment down. That was in the moment I, was kind of just going through it and processing, but it really just felt like that seeing that one other person of color in Taos, the only other hippie of color, it always just stuck with me. And I think it was that moment where something started to crack open that I otherwise had trouble acknowledging was bothering me. I think I would say a lot of my mental health experiences, I think a lot of it is rooted in the pain of assimilation, the pain of and fear that you live with as you are experiencing as a person of color, as a first generation person. The feeling of fitting in isn't just kind of fitting in, but almost feels life or death, feels like a survival strategy. And I think, I as a teenager, I always would want to just think of it as having fun. But I think how it really felt, my inner world started to crack open in that moment. What it really felt like, what me as a teen had a harder time acknowledging, the not fun parts of it. So that was like a moment. Me seeing this other hippie, this Black man hippie, and feeling like tied to him out of all the other people that I saw, and tied to him in ways where I felt like it reflected something going on with me, perhaps even projecting on him something that was going on in me.
And that was the first time that it really cracked. Because like in high school, as you're saying, like it was more of a repressed feeling, or something that you maybe didn't have a language for yet.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a moment where even then I struggled to name, but I was like, what is going on? I sort of broke down to my boyfriend at the time, like, there's something going on with me and I can't name it. We're in this sort of like, I was kind of like this hippie in this kind of idyllic hippie moment. But it just, something didn't feel right, even in what should be kind of considered like a good, like a good vibes moment, I guess. And it could, like, this thing was knocking on my door and I finally had to listen to it. This thing about,
and then you ended up writing a whole book about it.
Yeah.
So there's a quote where you say, living as a minority, and I do this every time. I think this is from the book. It might also be from an interview you did, but you say, living as a minority in America is living in a house laughing at you, and living as a model minority is joining in that laughter.
Yeah.
That's a really heartbreaking line. And I feel like the moment that you're talking about in Taos is about disengaging with that laughter.
Yeah. And finding something horrific underneath it. Going back to the line you just quoted, that was me thinking about the movie Evil Dead 2. And I just love that scene. I think not like that doesn't give away too much of either my book or the movie, because it's such an iconic scene of like when everything in the cabins just starts to laugh, starts to cackle. And it just always captivated me. And I wondered why. I think there's something that was the most truest expression to me of thinking about like, well, underneath all that like kind of enjoyment that I was like presenting out into the world. I was a teenager enjoying her life, enjoying these like, all these experiences, this counterculture that I was existing in. But in some ways it was like that frenetic laughter of this like possessed house. And underneath it is something like more horrific happening. And I was finally able to kind of like touch it. And I think in touching it and naming it was my first act of disengaging from it. Yeah. And I always feel like for many people, laughter, anything, laughter, tears, like just being able to be in contact with the feeling, the way you make me feel. The feeling of something is is the first kind of place where you can start to make different choices. Yeah.
That's well said. And it's amazing to me as human beings, myself most certainly included, the ways in which we can avoid feeling, be totally out of touch with how we deeply feel about something.
Yeah.
And then in these moments of reckoning where you actually do engage with the feeling of it,
absolutely,
like you weep, or it's surprising. I've had moments like this, and it's like surprising where you're like, oh, Jesus, I didn't realize I felt so strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm no expert, I have to say. It still is something that is, I'm always kind of surprised by something I've numbed feeling to. This book was one journey into, naming and exploring that, but it is surprising how it, keeps coming up.
Well, this is what I would classify as an unusually candid book, even for its kind, like even for a memoir. Like I came away from reading it feeling like, well, I really know Nina Sharma. Like you didn't hold back. I feel like I got to know you as a person. I think it solidifies my feeling that if you actually really get to know any human being
Mm.
intimately, like, if you really get the truth from somebody, you're almost definitely going to like them and root for them. Like warts and
Yeah.
all. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
this is very much like a warts and all book. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like you are, God, I think you even have a term for it in the book. I'm going to blank on what it is, but you're not, you're not glossing over the difficult stuff,
Yeah.
and you're depicting the, the intimacies of courtship and marriage, family stuff, racial stuff, all of it. And you're kind of looking at it as clear in as clear out a way as you possibly can and putting it
Mm-hmm.
down on the page in that manner.
Thank you.
And writing about sex and the body, writing
Yeah.
about, like I said, family, writing about really delicate political and cultural context that can be like challenging to engage with and to articulate. You do all of it. And I'm curious if it was a struggle for you or if this is something that you come by naturally as a writer. Like, does that level of candor come easily to you, or did you have to really like work it out of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that is my training really of like, and it's also for me, like the thrill of writing essays, of writing nonfiction is like, I always say it's like encountering your blind spot, noticing you're avoiding talking about something or going somewhere, and dropping deeper. I just love it. I feel like it's like my version of like bungee jumping or doing something that's like full of adrenaline. I love adrenaline activities too. So I feel like this is like my writing equivalent to that. I'd say like, I feel like might present, I don't think all the time, I think that's changing, as like a shy person, or like a reticent person. I was saying to somebody like, I'm trying to get better at gossiping, because gossiping, I think, is a way like people come together. But I'm just not great at it. I feel like people give me their intel, and then I'm like, wow, great, that's great to know. Because I'm not, or like my gossip is like, this is what happened in the dairy aisle. I don't know. So, but this feels like a place where I'm like, all right, this is me doing it. This is me giving me to you. It just feels like a place where I do that most naturally. It feels like something that I want to do anyways. And I found this great outlet, this way that feels like really true to me and really natural to me to do it. And I think it comes first from being captivated by the form itself. I didn't always identify as like a memoirist or an essay writer. I tried my hands at all different types of writings, and then I fell in love with other essayists and their candor and their ways of saying things that I realized, I thought I otherwise, without reading that essay, would have been ashamed to even think about that part of my life. And so I kind of began writing because I was so inspired by other memoirists, essayists, boldness. And I thought before I could even think of an audience, I thought maybe I wanted to do that too. And then later, maybe I want to do that for others too.
Yeah, I feel similarly. And I love to read this kind of stuff
Yeah.
because it's like medicinal. It's a relief when somebody's just being truthful with you. And I think that as a consequence of having read a lot of stuff in this vein, when I do read fiction, I'm always trying to extract from the fiction whatever like kind of truthful story is undergirding the fiction. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah, totally. It's really interesting that way. I mean, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot because now I've been started to write satire in the last couple years, and I do a bit of improv comedy on stage, and all of that is like fiction. But it's almost like I trick myself into like a fictional space. I still feel like I'm coming at it from a nonfiction person, but I do think it, like when I work in those genres, it does feel like it seems like the that they work best. Like my improv characters work best. The fiction writing I like works best when it comes from like seizing on a truth. And it feels kind of paradoxical for me, to be honest. Like memoir is it is the truth. It is fact. But for me to get to the most truthful place for it, I almost have to use, like I often say this, I have to think of myself as creating a fictitious world, that I'm a character, that my husband's a character. And that way I know that I'm not filtering anymore. I can finally tell like this character's bad behaviors or something like that. So fiction is a real gift to my craft in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good trick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you're tricking yourself. It's not like you actually believe that you're a character, but
yeah.
Just that simple distancing technique.
Yeah.
In
yeah,
the
that's
drafting
a good word
process,
for it.
It gives you the permission to just say, write about difficult family stuff.
Yeah.
But to do it truthfully. And I should underscore that, again, I like everybody in the book.
Oh.
Like even when your parents are maybe struggling with Quincy's blackness, right? And there's like racial tension within your family as you're falling in love with this guy and heading towards marriage and all this stuff. It's not that I approve or agree with like the difficulty, but they're human. These people are human beings, and you get them in all of their dimensionality. And when you get somebody like that, you sort of, I don't know, there's like just a kind of love that happens between reader and character, or reader and people depicted on the page. So I can imagine how, some writers might shy away from writing about that kind of stuff, or might have trouble wondering like, well, what's going to happen if I put this all down as I actually saw it happen? And are they going to be offended? How did you navigate that part of it? I'm imagining your parents have read the book.
Yeah, and they've started to, and they're very supportive so far. I was telling, when the book first launched, I remember getting texts from them, and I was telling my husband, I was like, Quincy, are these like written by AI? Like I couldn't like believe like their thoughtfulness, these texts coming to me. But I'm also like, I would say I'm ready for the harder conversations. Like that's what you sign up for as a memoirist, in whatever way you choose to involve or not involve your loved ones in the process. I think part of it is also being ready for those hard conversations. But yeah, for me, it was not easy. I'm glad that I had, my husband's one of my readers. I'm glad that I had people there that were, helpful eyes and reminding me that I was creating human beings. And that was really important to me. When I started working on this book in my MFA program, I remember like some initial essays I wrote that were just about me and Quincy. They were still like very, in my head, like gritty essays dealing with, couple conflicts, but there was something just like still too perfect about them. And they did not go over well in workshop. People were just like snooze or whatever. When I finally just, it took that, I think it was like my first semester. It took that first, pass at writing and sharing, being like, people want to see you in your realist manner. They want to see, I say with couple writing, they want to see you like fight over the dirty dishes and then some. And those are the moments that people resonate with, because that's who we all are. We're all warts and all. And so I hoped in creating these complicated characters, making every character, that I was creating human beings in that way that would resonate with all of our vulnerabilities, all of our, we all have blind spots. We all have things that we're working through. And I hope that in that way, I always say that I hope I created characters that are imperfect and that in that way resonate. And in that way, we're rooting for them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the case. And it's, again, it's like if you gloss over stuff or you hold back, readers can sniff it out. Right?
Yeah.
So it diminishes the read. People just can sense that there's just not enough truth in there, or it just doesn't
Yeah.
resonate as much. It's boring, right?
Yeah, and I feel like it's almost like you don't have to take it this way. This might be like workshop trauma, but it almost feels like you're insulting their humanity by excluding your humanity from the page. You don't have to have that dynamic, but I always think like, I don't want to. I don't want to do that either. The memoir should not be. No one should do this, but memoir shouldn't be like some sort of, you know. Aspirational space. I feel like it should be the opposite of that. I'm still working this idea out, but it should be the lives we live rather than the lives we aspire towards. Yeah.
You studied under Philip Lopate at
Yeah.
Columbia in their MFA program,
Yeah.
and you referred to your training. You were sort of trained in this kind of like really candid, personal nonfiction work.
Yeah.
And I this might be kind of a crude characterization, but I always characterize this kind of writing as like the nudists. Like it's like literary
Lope
nudists.
would love that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Lopate, David Shields, who I've had on this show, is another person where you're just like, okay, this is who this person is. Like I have fewer like instances to think like there might be something hidden. You know what I'm saying? Almost none. And
Yeah.
I only say that because I don't think anyone can ever be like 100% perfectly candid. There's always going to be something that isn't there, either intentionally or not. But like, is that how you view it? Is this the tradition that you're working in? Like, does that characterization resonate with you?
Definitely. I know on Lopate at the start of his this great anthology, I think it's The Art of the Personal Essay, and he writes the foreword to it. It's a beautiful foreword for all the essayists out there. Really, it's his love letter. I mean, the whole book, that whole anthology is his love letter to that essay. I would say he's like the essay grandpa to me. Like he's like the granddaddy. So, and that introduction is really so beautiful in the way that he turns over all different types of essay and all different aspects of it. But one thing that he says in there is like, it's this kind of constant, an essay is a constant process of unmasking, and not to get to kind of like some kind of like bare bones, not to get fully nude, but you're just like I think he says something like getting to the final mask, or it's like kind of a relentless or infinite experience of that, of like constantly, processing. I'll go back to my word, like constantly finding a new blind spot and then trying to pierce it. And that's a journey. And I think, learning from someone like him, and also many of my other teachers in that program, Margot Jefferson, Megan Daum, like there's something that's really playful about that too. All my teachers kind of doubled down on like, that one way of doing that work is to find and to endure in it, to get truthful and to like be in the like long distance marathon of it is like find some play in it, find something to play with. So those two things always go together for me.
Well, and how would you say that like this idea of play factored into the writing of The Way You Make Me Feel? Like, were there aspects of it? Because like I'm thinking of how you integrate pop culture a lot in this book. Like there are references, and these are just a few of them, but like When Harry Met Sally, Mississippi Masala, The Walking Dead, The Grateful Dead. Like there's all sorts of different cultural references, and they're not just made for kicks. I think part of it is that, pop culture for a first generation person can be a vehicle for assimilation. So that's part of why, but like, it's also fun. Yeah. And I think it maybe gives people a point of access to the book. It kind of brings people in, and is that part of the play?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that is the origin story of the book. I always talk about the title story of the book in particular when I think about play, which when I wrote it, I didn't think it was going to be the title story of the book. I just, I was just this story that emerged out of me. But the Way You Make Me Feel, the title story, was like came about in many different ways. But one of the ways was I wrote the opener to it, the first couple paragraphs, in the middle of my MFA program. And it kind of just, but not like for a class. I was in a class at the time that I feel like kind of entranced me. I was in a James Baldwin seminar, and all we did all semester was just read James Baldwin with another great teacher, Hilton Als. And I just remember coming back from that class. And this was not for an assignment or anything, but just a scene came to my mind. And I just could not get home fast enough. And I just got to the computer and it just sort of slipped out of me. Like I almost got out of my own way to get it out. And I was just like, wow, this is the first time so many things emerged for me that I had trouble writing about. But the biggest one was writing about my nervous breakdown when I was 19. And it came out in that moment when it just, in this kind of like spooky, not trying way. And then I was like, whoa, what can I do with this? And every time I tried to go back to it, though, it just felt like I could never match up to what I had done. And it was such a strange experience. Like my writerly tools that I thought I had could just never match what kind of like mysteriously came out of me that afternoon. And I really kind of struggled with it. My husband's my first reader. I would show him attempts at trying to continue the story, and he named it for me. He was like, "It just feels like you're writing from a place of shame," and it felt like a real like painful place. It felt almost like physical pain, so I just stopped doing it. And then I finally decided to return to it my thesis semester with Margot Jefferson, and I mustered up the courage to tell her I'd been working on this story about my mental health, and I couldn't even get those words out right, but she caught it. She, being the awesome teacher and writer and person she is, caught it. And she asked me simply, do I remember experiencing any pleasure during that time period? And then I just remember this like wild scene of me in the midst of a manic episode, pulling out like this haute couture fuchsia dress from a closet. And all of a sudden I was like charmed by this character. It was no longer it was me, but it was this character of like, who's this like awesome chick who's in the middle of a manic episode, pulling out a dress, making some decisions. I want to write about her. And all of a sudden the rest of the essay came to be. And from that point on, it became so important to me to center, to keep Margot's question in mind. Do I remember pleasure? Seizing on that, letting it be an anchor, letting it be something that helps me tell the story from a space of, rather than stigma and shame, what I say, moving more towards accuracy and depth. Because then, right, like I'm thinking about pulling in the senses, the sensory experiences of that moment, pulling in the color of the dress, the texture of the dress, the character now making choices of getting in the car with it. All of a sudden, the actual like details of the story started to come through more than they ever had. So that is not only a way of spiritually enduring, but actually finding the pleasure, using it as an anchor to tell a story can help you tell it in the most truthful way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like tied to this trick that you do to yourself where you distance yourself and think of yourself as a character on the page, as you've been saying.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting and insightful instruction that she gave you that I have not heard before on the show. Or like I wouldn't have thought of it, but it's like, if you're feeling a sense of deep shame or stigma or darkness even, because sometimes when we're writing about the most painful stuff in our lives, the process of trying to write about it can feel so heavy.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, there's just dread in going to the keyboard, or you just get inside of it and it becomes this kind of like pity party, right?
Yeah.
Or like, and then people don't want to read that. And then it becomes like, like, why am I even trying to do this? Nobody wants to hear my bullshit. That kind of conversation. But it's like, no, think about like a moment where you actually weren't unhappy inside of that period of your life that was dark.
Yeah.
And start there. Like, it's not that you're trying to depict this period of difficulty in your life as like fun and like
Yeah.
filled with fancy dresses and haute couture.
Yeah.
It's just about a point of access, right?
Right. Exactly. Access point. Whatever you can do to get you to that kind of, that deeper, accessing a, more depth of experience, use it. Yeah. And I often say, the fun doesn't have to be like a traditional notion of fun. It can be weird. It can be uncommon. I often say that, me and my husband always talk about this. The fun of the story is sometimes you've just survived the hard thing and lived to tell, and you can that way, like no pressure finding like some, fun TM like type of thing either as you're, just find whatever helps you access and get curious, get interested, get in the senses of your story in a new way. Yeah.
So this book, I think at its very core is a love story.
Yeah.
It's the story of you and your husband, Quincy. And it's the story of an interracial relationship that often, and you make note of this, does not get depicted in our popular culture. Mm-hmm. Like when we talk about interracial couples, I think the first thing that springs to mind for most people is like a Black person and a white person in a mm-hmm. relationship. And you and your husband, this is like an Asian and Black or South Asian and Black relationship, right?
Yeah.
And that comes with its own challenges, and you write about them like within the context of your family. I think you write about them culturally just because there's not a lot of touchstones. Mm-hmm. You write about the culture, like even our political culture. You write, I think, very movingly about Kamala Harris and like the meaning that she has for you and Quincy, yeah, as a child of this very kind of interracial coupling. And can you just talk a little bit about that part of things, like writing into your most important relationship and the challenges of navigating all that comes with it when it comes to this other stuff?
Yeah, I think there's so many ways that I fell in love with writing about us. One of the ways, I realize I haven't talked about this as much, as it came out of just, it was my material at the moment. Before I was in my MFA program, I moved to Philly, literally not even out of like love at that point, just literally out of straight up lust. Like I just moved to Philly, to his apartment, to close the long distance gap and to, just be with this guy that I wanted to be in bed with, like jump on all the time. I just made like lessons sometimes, like listen to it. Yeah, so I moved there, and I did have like one or two friends there, but one of my closest friends actually moved right around the time that I moved there. So I didn't have much of anybody. And I started taking a class. This great writer, her name's Minter Kreutzer, at this bookstore, Big Blue Marble Bookstore. Her class was called Life Writing, and we just get readings and homework assignments around life writing. And at that time, like my life was me and Quincy. There's nobody else in Philly. I came from a very kind of lively New York City literary world. I was working at the Asian American Writers Workshop. I left all of that, and it was just me and Quincy. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll write about us. And it really, came out of like me writing about him, came out of that was my most immediate material. And I also just found out that I just really enjoyed it. And at the time we were also getting married. And I found this life writing class coincided with a lot of the stress I was feeling, trying to navigate, first of all, just being a bride, and this whole kind of wedding industrial complex, but more profoundly what it meant for our, all the stuff that I'd gone through with my family already, before even the marriage, and how it felt like it was presenting itself now to me, as I was getting married, even though we had come to the other side of it. So it just writing around the time of my wedding and shortly after became a way of like processing all that had happened. And I guess I was processing, through the act of processing, I felt also pulled towards history. When I began to work on this and share it in Minter's life writing class, and I'd say she was such a great mentor. She and her husband, Hal Sirowitz, also a great poet. They're both such great mentors. And I remember when I began the workshop, thought I was writing like a how-to book, like how to get married. And I just remembered, oh no, like if anything, I was trying to like satirize like the how-to format or something. But I immediately, in getting that response, I realized I was being pulled towards something else. I was pulled towards thinking about what Quincy and I went through, how those problems and issues, how those conflicts with my family, how they tied to like a greater history of Afro-Asian relations. And, as personal as I got, the more I wanted to explore that history. To me, that's exploring like how the problem and model minority played off of each other. And also,
and just to slow down, the problem minority being like blacks, like this is the perception or whatever.
Yeah, the perception
being the Asians.
Yeah, the model minority being Asians, being these like docile, good citizens, quiet, passive citizens. Problem minorities being, those that are loud or angry. And again, I like think of this as rooted in coming up at the same time as the 1965 Immigration Act. During the civil rights era, these two archetypes were created. And so like how those two things played off of each other, how we've absorbed them, and how they play out in my family's pushback against Quincy, how dating a black man could be a threat to their model minority status in that way. That's something that I wanted to explore in the book. And also, I wanted to think about my own hesitations to delve into identity, to delve into my personal identity, for me to think about my relationship with white supremacy, which is a complicated one. If you play into the model minority stereotype, which I don't think I did. This is not a story of a girl that was once a model minority and then stopped being that. Like that feels like too neat of a South Asian girl narrative. I don't think I was performing that, but I think there's some ways, even if you're not performing that, you absorb it, you profit from it. And what did I need to do to be aware of my own racism, my own anti-Blackness? What did I need to do in order to, both be someone who's able to talk about myself? As I often say, like, dating Quincy was this opportunity of realizing that I had trouble talking about, like, he had a lot of comfortability talking about racism. We'd go out to dinner and we'd be the only two like people of color in this like chocolate restaurant. This is a scene from the book, and him being like, look at them looking at us, and being able to freely talk about our high visibility in this very white space, and me feeling a lot more reticent. And then those moments being like, oh damn, I want to like, first of all, like be able to like flirt with this guy. It's so weird. It was like a lot of it was just motivated by lust, but like I want to be able to talk to this guy. Why, when it comes to the issues of race and racism, do I all of a sudden feel like I don't have any words? And it feels like I'm just, I don't want the date to be over, but when I get that silent, it's almost like the date is over. So I just, came up against like, I want to talk about race, not only to get to know this guy and have an intimate conversation with him more, but I was struck by how hesitant I was, to talk about these issues of racism and identity with myself.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's
It's
hard,
hard.
but that's the most rewarding relationship, being able to, wrap your head around your own identity and being able to have that ongoing life conversation with yourself. It makes you a better, partner to yourself. And then I think more broadly, I think about, coming into like a critical consciousness as a way of being a better ally to my husband, and then more broadly out of that, thinking about how our experience can be one way of thinking about Afro-Asian allyship, a journey into Afro-Asian allyship.
Well, that's one of the most like fascinating and rewarding parts of the read for me, is the fact that it brought to light how specific different kinds of interracial relationships are. And I think that along with this self-investigation, you touched on earlier how kind of like as a natural reaction or a natural extension of this self-investigation and this confrontation with these difficult issues around race and identity, you found yourself exploring history.
Yeah.
As a way to sort of, I think, frame your own experiences and understand them better,
Yeah.
right? It's a useful
Absolutely.
exercise. And I just want to touch, just so listeners can get kind of a sense of like some of the places that you go in this respect. You write about, we talked about Kamala Harris, her childhood, her upbringing in this kind of like, it's like this collection of mothers in Berkeley. Her father was kind of out of the picture, but she's the product of an Black and Asian relationship. You write about George Floyd. Like one of the most harrowing passages in the book is about George Floyd's murder, the Asian spa shooting in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Forgive me for forgetting the name, but there's a man murdered in Michigan, an Asian man.
The Vincent Chin.
Vincent Chin.
Yeah.
And then you're writing about the Walking Dead. And I watched some of that, or like a couple of the early, but I get too scared. So I had to like tap out, because I only watch this stuff at night before bed, and I'm like, I can't watch this shit like right before I fall asleep.
That's a tough one much. Before bed.
Yeah. So, but the Asian character, I'm forgetting his name because that's what I do.
Oh, Glenn. Yeah, Glenn. That's Stephen Yeun's character. Yeah.
Yeah, you're writing about Glenn's killing and the backlash that happened in connection with this murder in Michigan. You're writing about Trump.
Yeah.
And your father's membership at Trump's club. And his sort of embrace of Trump, which is like, that's very fascinating, all of those dynamics. But you're looking into, and then did I say you write about the Lovings, which I think is a very kind of elemental relationship and historical precedent to examine in the context of interracial marriage, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're sort of the beginning. And the Lovings, for people listening, there's a law, right? It's like the Lovings Act or whatever, right? They like legalized interracial marriage.
Yeah, they turned over the remaining miscegenation laws, taking their case to the Supreme Court. Yeah.
That's right. So this is all part of the fabric of this book.
Yeah.
And it has helped you to maybe draw yourself in your own relationship into sharper focus.
Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah. It's incredible. That's, I think, the joy of the essay, is realizing those things deeply fill out your character too.
So I have to ask, because it's on your mind in the book and it's in the air right now, but you write, I think, very pointed. You write very critically of Trump and his racial politics and the dangers that he poses to people of color and disadvantaged communities. Having written this book and having grown up in Jersey, like within kind of spitting distance of like Trump and his world, like how are you feeling right now as we sit in July of 2024, like heading towards this election in November?
Oh, just peachy.
But like, what's
bracing
your
myself? We're in it together. Don't vote for Trump. Don't vote for Trump. Talk to your family members. Something I talk about in the book is that's also that the imperative to do that is complicated. I just wanted to flag that. saying, I think this is a time like any other time where we will have those hard conversations, but those hard conversations dovetail into many other hardships that we experience with our families. I'm particularly probably talking about other South Asian people right now who have Trump voting family members. That's who I'm specifically looking into the camera and talking to right now. But I want to say that like those hard conversations dovetail into other hard conversations, other hard experiences we have with our family that we don't necessarily realize are connected to Trump, to authoritarianism, to all the threats that are ahead of it, but are. You might think whatever family stuff you have going on is petty, that like in comparison, like that thing that is kind of haunted you is as important and as part of having that conversation as anything else. So it just, I wanted to say that as I'm saying, this is the time we're going to have hard conversations, but, we're living in an extraordinary time. And I think maybe just the thing that I think about right now is it a lot parallels what it means to write into extraordinary and hard and vulnerable experiences is like, what do we need to do to endure? Because we have a long fight ahead of us. Like, what are the practices that we need in place to keep us going, to use that word, to find pleasure, to find fun, to find uncommon notions of fun, to find a protest fun. Protests are fun. Protests are full of fun.
They can be.
Yeah, they can be. It can surprise you. I think that something that the last, from the pandemic and, prior to has taught me anything as a person that also likes a lot of control in their life, is that life is so unpredictable and is so full of interruption, so full of things that you did not expect to happen. And so what can we do to show up for these moments in a way that is, I think, like really showing up, and having hard conversations, building community. I think this is a time where we build community with each other as we go forward. How can we do that in a way that's like really real? And I think that what I mean to say that kind of drops kind of notions of control, because if we're doing that, then we're just as bad as them. So that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's on your mind in the book for sure. One of the political and cultural touchstones that I failed to mention was the pandemic and the way that there was so much anti-Asian racism that resulted from it, particularly due to Trump's rhetoric and the rhetoric from the GOP about the virus being the China virus and all this stuff. I mean, there was this wave of hate crimes that resulted that you could draw a line from. And like, it's one of those things, like there's been so much chaos and darkness emanating from Trump and from the American political right when it comes to racial politics in this country and otherwise, that like, it's sad to say, but it's easy to forget like really awful stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was reading that section of the book and I was like, oh yeah, like there was the whole China virus thing. And then, Asian women just getting beaten on the street by crazy people who were responding, no doubt, to that sort of like racist rhetoric. And
some of the things that we're asking for now are just, we have to remember, are so obvious. It's so wild. And I think that just like helps me realize, it's to keep the not normalness of this time in mind is so important. Like, I'm a teacher. I'm at Columbia right now. There's a lot of cops on campus. There's a lot of people striking specifically to say like no cops on campus. And one of my friends was like, that phrase, no cops on campus, isn't very incendiary when you think about it. It's not incendiary to say no cops on campus in any other, time period. So I think that's when we're going to be kind of, bombarded by this really hateful rhetoric and having to challenge it, is going to be, I mean, in some ways this is the time as writers and creative people, like this is our time to step out. But I think it's also this time to, it's incredible to kind of seize on this rhetoric and the things that we're challenging, realize like, we're asking for basic human rights, basic human decency. The challenges to it right now are so extraordinary. And I think it's important to keep again, like keep in community, keep being with each other as a way of, taking action, remembering that that there's a center that that we can hold each other's center rather than theirs. Yeah.
Well said. Well, before I let you go, I don't think we're going to solve the American political situation in one conversation. It's a hard nut to crack.
That sucks.
But we tried. But
we really try.
I want to end on a bit of a lighter note. You talked earlier about how you love adrenaline activities, and you touched earlier on the fact that you are someone who does improv. I've heard that a little bit from guests on this show, like once or twice, but it's not a common thing for writers to do. Adrenaline activities like bungee jumping, or B, like improv, which I think is its own kind of adrenaline activity. I'd like to hear you talk about that, especially the improv, but also if you could just if there are any other adrenaline activities that you regularly engage in. I'd be curious to know what they are.
We could have a whole different podcast on improv and Jerry Garcia and those could possibly go together. I think they do go together in my head. But I mean, I just kind of, there's an old improv phrase, follow the fear. I think that's always been me. Why am I afraid of doing this thing? Let me just try it. And so that was my in with improv, and it's not disappointed in that way. Again, I guess as an essayist, I'm always thinking about my thrill is figuring out something in my blind spot and challenging it and growing through the process. In this case, this book, really thinking about delving deeper and deeper and deeper into how I think and feel and understand racism, anti-Blackness, how Asian American, African American experiences come together and are pulled apart. But I experienced that on stage too, in a very specific way. I think about my hesitations there, where they come from, how to push past them. And I see myself changed through the process, being, you start to walk about the world in a new way through the process. So I just, that's something that I get from improv.
Do you think that it makes you a better writer?
100%. I think it keeps me being an honest writer, because improv is so, you just have to come from an honest place. It keeps me also in the silly pocket. A lot of my Grateful Dead years was also taking a bunch of acid. I've never talked about this with anybody on a podcast, but
this is the place to do it.
Okay. And there's something I try to explain this to my husband. It changed my life for the better. There's something about acid.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. So we should, this is a conversation to have. But there's something about it that for me, it wasn't having a mystical experience, which, kudos to everyone it does, but it just everything about everything about life that is absurd and silly that I already felt was there, just really came to the fore, was really honored in the acid trip experience. And I feel I just want to live there forever. I just want to live there forever once you've experienced that. And you don't often get spaces where you can live there forever, but improv is. So improv always feels like a home, a silly home for me. If I could just be silly all the time and absurd all the time, I just would want to be. I think I am. But improv, like, that's where it's deadly important to do that. And I bring that, like, they say the first rule of comedy, comedy at its core is, truthful, or has this, like, people who do it, there's like a deadly seriousness about it. Now it sounds like too serious, but the importance of honoring silly and how important it to me, like, I always like pull it back to the page after doing improv. It's always there as much as anything else is. So that's what I get from improv.
It's like, just so I'm hearing you correctly, it's like, from improv, you get the critical importance of truth, the critical importance of a sense of play.
Yeah.
And making space for that whenever you're engaged
exactly.
creatively.
Yeah. And like, sorry, go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
And I was just going to say, it's like truth, a sense of play and silliness, maybe bringing some humor to the work, even if the work isn't like explicitly like comedic.
Totally. I think that's
maybe
exactly.
not taking yourself too seriously.
Yeah, 100%. Not taking yourself too seriously. I think I once heard an actor talk about this. The actress in Barry who played I'm just forgetting her name. She's such a wonderful actress who played the lead in Barry.
This is the Bill Hader show.
Yeah, the Bill Hader show. And she said, like, acting school for her was just getting comfortable with the embarrassment of acting, and the acting is like deeply embarrassing. And I love that. And I think that's something similar going on in improv with me. Sometimes I'm like, why am I embarrassed being a cat on stage? And what are the shitty things, like the shitty imperatives of life and being an adult, that keep you from being uninhibitedly a cat on stage? And I so admire my, improvisers I'm on stage with that are like, are uninhibitedly a cat, or I don't know what, like a space cat, something, like just making up things on stage. And they're not only just being silly, but when you watch them, you are watching like some truth play out, something like really feels like really meaningful just from committing, just from yes anding. And so I just, want to bring that back to the page. It really does change. Like, now that I've done it for a couple of years, I when I don't do it, I feel kind of weird. I feel like I can't write without doing it now. And I'm still wrapping my head around it. Yeah.
Did any of the Way You Make Me Feel happen under the influence of improv? You said the last
almost
2 years.
All of it. Yeah, I would say, except for 2 essays, and a lot of the material I just had, and but like actually comprising it, almost like a 3/4 of it happened during my improv career. And there's just something about being in your body, and then that's so meaningful and reminds me of like being in my full body when I write. Yeah.
Well, this is a very, like I said at the top, this is a very embodied, like it's very much about the body. And I feel like you're leaning into that because it's about Black and brown bodies. It's about just like refusing to hide anything. I felt that there's a real courage in that. And it also just like makes like a very cool creative sense that you would be benefiting from improv in writing a book that's as candid as this one, and that has as much lateral movement as it does, among subject matters, and drawing these kinds of disparate connections. Like that feels improvisational in a way, like you're discovering it in the act of writing as opposed to preconceiving it. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's that's exactly what it is. I think it really, improv opens you up to discovery, that all of it is discovery. And I think the more I just approach my writing life that way, the more something like that has a real heat signature, more instantly will come on the page. Yeah.
But it's also where the fun is.
Yeah.
Like it's where the fun is creatively as the writer, but it's also the fun of it for the reader.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I know
Totally.
like improvisation can get sloppy, right? It's got to
Yeah.
be like, it's sort of like, but that's kind of like the thing about it is that, you know, if we're going to stick to writing, like if you're feeling improvisational on the page and you're letting yourself sort of go in different directions and kind of follow your nose, not every day at the keyboard is going to be your greatest day. And
No.
they're going to be
Mm,
greater and lesser degrees of
yeah.
presence and connectivity and momentum, just like there is musically when
Yeah.
musicians are improvising. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it works and then other times it's like, well, this sounds kind of weird.
Yeah.
But when it really works, it really is awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that if you work in that mode and you get that hit, it's probably hard to not do it that way.
Yeah, I think so. I think improv helps me like not fake write, like an idea of what this essay should sound like, an idea of what talking about X, Y, and Z should sound like. And helps you just stop thinking. They always say on stage, like, stop thinking, just do. It's like terrifying to a writer, a thinker. But I really feel like it's true. It just helps you like tell the story in the most honest way using all the muscles that are available to you, really using them, rather than the idea that has to, rather than sort of kind of like a front of the house kind of version of the story. Um, yeah.
And you formed your own improv troupe, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and Not Your Biwi. It's like all South Asian women improv troupe. Yeah, it really just that was like my home base while I was working on this book. It was like in the middle of the pandemic. We, met every Sunday. We were doing it before the pandemic, but we continued on just ourselves doing it through it. And I just feel like I would have just gone bonkers, creatively bonkers. Everyone needed their something, but I think it very much creatively paid forward in the book.
So
Yeah.
a question for you. Is this South Asian improv troupe? Hang on one second. Twiggy. No. Sorry.
So cute.
Yeah.
Tweety wants into the improv conversation.
You can see her. She's right there. She's barking at my neighbor's like yard guy. But so a question I have for you is this improv troupe of South Asian women that you've put together comprised of South Asian women writers who are doing improv on the side, or are you the only like literary person in the bunch?
I think some of them, they write, but I guess I'm the only one who's like professionally like writing books and things like that. Yeah, one of my teammates, she runs a great mac and cheese restaurant in New York City called Smack. There's a teacher. The other person, works at Con Ed. Yeah, so we all kind of different walks of life, and build something very creative together. And I think us together give back to my writing practice in a pretty profound way. There's something, to be doing it with us. We can pull a very specific type of comedy from each other. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I think you write about how you had trouble really finding your footing in improv until you were with other South Asian women kind of feeding off of each other. You have kind of, I think, you have to have like a lingua franca, right? Or some like intuitive, some intuitive sense of the world that is similar and that you can just kind of like easily access or more easily access.
It's a different playful space. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think too, like, as I'm talking to you, it's like, man, I feel like maybe like as an unorthodox, but like effective, like sort of hybridized writing workshop, if there are people who are working on books and doing some sort of workshop together to like put that in tandem with an improv situation, might not be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like to pair those two things, I think is sort of genius. And like,
I agree.
I haven't seen it. So like maybe there's like going to be a trend where like writing workshops start to incorporate improv.
I have met a lot of people who do both through the course of tour or do some kind of version of both. So there should be,
just to like, because like the sitting down to write, it's like getting through that shame space, getting to that honest place, getting through the self-doubt, getting through the fear.
Yeah.
Like the thing about improv is that it's embodied and it's interpersonal. You're with other people. There's people watching you maybe. And it forces your hand.
Yeah.
Way more than like sitting at the keyboard does.
It does. And you begin to enjoy the pleasure of your hand being forced. And that's just like such a wonderful gift to your writing life, because that is really like, that's where the title started. When I talk about that moment where the initial thing just slipped out of me, the opener, that was an improv moment, I would say, in the best way. Like I got out of my own, I got out of my own way. The story was, my scene partner in that moment. It wasn't just me steering the ship,
Unafraid.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, it's a joy to talk with you. This is a wonderful book. I'm glad we got to spotlight it in the book club. Congratulations to you on seeing it through for a decade and living this life of yours and putting it down on the page. I think it's going to be of real benefit to people who read it for a variety of reasons.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.